You are not special for feeling too much. You are a prisoner of your own shadow. Carl Jung already knew the empath was not born enlightened, but born conditioned. Your kindness is not purity, it is survival. With every yes you said, you killed a piece of yourself. And if this burns inside you, sign up now, because there is no consolation here, only a scalpel. This video will not massage your pain, it will tear it apart. Because the empath is not a saint, it is the child who was never allowed to be selfish. And today you will have to face that mirror. You grew up believing your sensitivity was a gift, almost a divine touch, but you never realized that in truth it was a scar disguised as a virtue. The empath, as Carl Jung would say, isn't born ready to carry the world. They are shaped by the weight of pain they could never repay. How many times have you smiled when you wanted to scream? How many times have you stifled tears because you knew no one could bear to hear the noise of your soul? This is the scar that smiles, the persona that dresses in light to hide the shadow. And that's why you feel so tired, because you're not living, you're acting, you're supporting a mask that people applaud. But that, inside, bleeds. Think about it. The world doesn't call you strong because it sees your soul, but because it doesn't realize how tattered it is. The empath learns early on to silence their own pain to become useful. The child who sensed the mood in the house before even opening their mouth already knew that feeling too much was dangerous. Smiling became defense, kindness became prison, and you grew up believing it was love, when in fact it was survival. This is the trap of scarring. The more you give, the more invisible you become. The more you nullify yourself, the more comfortable others feel in existing. You've become everyone's psychic cushion, the ear that never tires, the shoulder that never refuses. But who holds your weight when you break down? Who sees you beyond the role you play? The truth is harsh. Almost no one. And yet, you keep smiling as if it were a virtue. Carl Jung said that the shadow is made of everything we can't bear to admit about ourselves. And what you can't admit is that your empathy tastes of resentment, of repressed need, of stifled desire. You call it altruism, but deep down, you know it's fear of abandonment. And this fear is the glue that keeps the mask stuck to your face. It's what keeps you in the invisible prison of applause. Everyone claps except you. The self within you can no longer stand this farce, can no longer bear the silence that screams. You feel something is about to break, that this smiling scar won't last forever. Because the next chapter of your life is no longer about keeping up appearances, but about facing the moment when the child who smiles becomes the child who watches. Do you remember what it was like to walk on eggshells? That feeling that any misplaced word could start a fire in the house? That's where the antenna child is born. Even before you could read, you could interpret your father's mood by the way he closed the door, or your mother's mood by the sound of a sigh. This wasn't spiritual evolution, it was survival. You learned that silence could be more dangerous than screaming, and that smiling was the surest way to cover your tracks. Carl Jung called this premature ego adaptation, when the child's psyche accelerates to endure an environment that should protect it. It's like putting a child behind the wheel of a speeding car. They survive, but they'll never be the same again. The antenna child grows up with eyes that see too much, ears that hear what no one else has said, and a sensitivity they never asked for. And you know the cruelest thing? Everyone finds it admirable. They say, look how mature she is, how understanding he is, how he knows how to listen. But no one realizes that behind this talent lies fear. Fear of being rejected if they dare to ask. Fear of being called selfish if they dare to demand. The adult empath is born from this terrain, from the child who had to guess other people's feelings because their own never had space. It's as if all your vital energy had been hijacked to ensure the world around you wouldn't explode. And deep down, the price was clear. You disappeared before you even existed. And here lies the deepest wound. When you learn to capture everything, you begin to believe you have an obligation to carry it all. You become an emotional compass for others, but you lose your own bearings. And the more you grow, the harder it becomes to separate what's yours from what's someone else's projection. This isn't a gift, it's a prison. Because as you specialize in feeling for others, you become a stranger to yourself. The self screams, but the antenna intercepts, distorts, silences. And this distortion continues until you realize you're no longer just a vigilant child. You're now an adult who has constructed an entire persona to hide this lack of grounding. The persona is the mask you've learned to wear to survive. It's not just a social role, it's the makeup that hides the fissures of the soul. Carl Jung knew the persona is necessary, but when it becomes the only face, it kills the self. You've grown accustomed to being loved for what you offer, not for who you are. You've learned that there's only room for you when you serve, when you're silent, when your smile hides the shadow. The empath then becomes a kind of utilitarian reflex. Everyone seeks you out because you understand, because you comfort, because you're always there. But who sees the soul behind the reflection? Who recognizes you beyond the role you play? Few, and this lack of recognition is what silently corrodes you. The soul-deadening persona isn't built overnight. It's born in small gestures of denial. When you wanted to cry but were told, don't be weak. When you wanted to play but were told, be responsible. When you dared to complain but were silenced by the weight of guilt. Little by little, you traded authenticity for acceptance, truth for applause, soul for usefulness. And this exchange, which seemed like a survival strategy, became a long-term prison. Look around. How many times do you say, everything's fine, when in fact you're falling apart? How many times do you pride yourself on being trustworthy, when deep down you just want to be seen without having to support anyone? This is the cruel mark of the persona. It shines on the outside, but suffocates on the inside. The most dangerous thing is that the world applauds your mask. You're so good. You're so understanding. You're light. But no one realizes that this glow is artificial, sustained by the fear of losing love. The persona steals your vitality because it demands you deny everything that doesn't fit the role of good guy. And what happens to everything that was denied? It goes into the shadow. Anger, desire, limits, ego, all the legitimate fragments of the self are buried, creating a psychic time bomb. The empath at this point finds themselves divided. The applause keeps the mask alive, but the soul begins to scream inside. And this scream is the shadow calling, demanding to be heard, finally demanding to be integrated. The empath's shadow isn't made of hidden light, but of swallowed anger, stifled desires, and limits never spoken aloud. Carl Jung said that the true tragedy isn't having a shadow, but ignoring its existence. You who have always been the good, generous, understanding person know all too well what it means to choke back the scream and offer a smile instead. This anger doesn't disappear, it ferments. It accumulates in sleepless nights, in pain doctors can't explain, in an exhaustion no bed can cure. It's the price of having transformed your right to exist into a bargaining chip for acceptance. And the cruelest part is that you yourself believe this gilded prison is a virtue. The shadow holds what you've learned to hate within yourself. The ego that demands space, the body that craves rest, the mouth that wants to say no. You've learned to call it selfishness, but it's actually a survival instinct. The empath takes pride in carrying others, but they don't admit that this burden stems from an ancient fear. The fear of being discarded if they dare to live for themselves. This is why the shadow is uncomfortable, because it exposes the persona's deception. When anger surfaces, you rush to hide it, to stifle it, to transform it into another okay. But it's not okay, it never was. The shadow throbs because it wants to remind you that even boundless kindness can turn into self-destruction. And perhaps you felt it, that emptiness after helping someone who gave you nothing in return, that silent frustration of always being the shoulder to cry on and never the hug. This isn't just emotional exhaustion. It's the shadow demanding entry. And the more you repress it, the more it finds distorted ways to express itself, in sudden outbursts, in toxic relationships, in illnesses of the soul. The empath's shadow isn't the enemy. It's the part of you that demands to be acknowledged. And if you have the courage to face it, you'll realize that it holds not only anger, but also the key to your individuation. Because it's precisely this confrontation that paves the way for the next truth, the prison of compulsive kindness. Compulsive kindness is one of the most sophisticated prisons the human psyche constructs. It has no visible bars, but it's present every time you give in unintentionally, in every smile that hides the weight of a swallowed silence. The empath believes they've chosen to be good, but in truth, they're serving an old sentence, a sentence that began in childhood, when they realized they would only be loved if they were useful. Carl Jung warned us, when the persona becomes the only way of existing, the self unravels, fragmented into pieces that survive only to maintain the acceptance of others. And this is what happens to you when your kindness isn't born of choice, but of the need to avoid abandonment. With each automatic yes, you strengthen the invisible cell that imprisons you. You transform into a useful ghost, always present, always accessible, always praised, but always invisible. And this invisibility comes at a brutal cost, because while the world applauds your generosity, you feel, deep down, that something vital is being lost. Do a simple exercise now. Recall how many times you said yes when you wanted to scream no. How many times did you accept invitations that drained your energy just so you wouldn't disappoint? How many times did you help people who deep down never remembered you, and yet you carried the weight of the world on your shoulders? This is the mechanics of compulsive kindness. The more you offer, the more others demand. And the more they demand, the more you cling to the role of savior. It's a silent mechanism, a contract you never signed but fulfill perfectly. And this trap is dangerous because you confuse exhaustion with purpose. You confuse wear and tear with mission. You believe that being exhausted is proof that you're being useful. But this isn't usefulness, it's exploitation. It's not virtue, it's refined self-abandonment. It's like giving the entire world the oxygen in your own lungs and then being surprised that you're suffocating. Limitless altruism isn't greatness. It's a sophisticated form of emotional suicide. This prison is especially cruel because it disguises itself as virtue. Society will call you an angel, will say you are light, will use you as an example. But you know the truth. Behind this image lie sleepless nights, anxiety attacks, a soul crying out for rest. This kindness everyone celebrates is not a gift, it's an emotional addiction. And like all addictions, it takes its toll. It takes its toll on your health, your energy, your identity. You begin to live as if you were a shadow of yourself, someone who is always available to others but never present to themselves. And within this gilded cell, a movement begins to emerge. Because every prison, no matter how beautiful it seems, one day becomes unbearable. And when you finally see that kindness has become a chain, something inside you will break. This rupture is not a comfortable choice, but a psychic urgency. And it carries a name you've always avoided because you were taught to fear it, authenticity. And that's when the soul begins to rise up against the mask. Authenticity isn't born softly, it's born as a rupture. It's the moment you dare to say no without justifying yourself, when you decide that your life will no longer be a bargaining chip for the acceptance of others. Carl Jung said that the self only reveals itself when the persona begins to crack, and this crack hurts. You realize that your entire life has built bridges that only led outward, never inward. The empath, conditioned to always conform, carries the visceral fear of being accused of selfishness when they finally choose themselves. And therein lies the paradox. The courage to be authentic requires you to let go of projective roles, to accept being called cold, distant, ungrateful. But this pain is liberating because for the first time, you're not betraying yourself to keep others comfortable. Authenticity is rupture because it requires breaking invisible contracts, even if the price is the silence of those who once applauded you. Think about how many times you've been praised for being trustworthy, approachable, and understanding. These compliments felt like gifts, but they were chains. They kept you trapped in a role you didn't choose, a role that required erasing your shadow to remain loved. Authenticity breaks this cycle because it no longer allows you to live as a character. It arrives when you discover that you don't need to smile to be accepted, you don't need to give in to deserve love, you don't need to disappear to fit in. This break, however, is brutal. Friends may walk away, family may accuse you, partners may feel betrayed. But here's the hard truth. If love depends on your self-denial, it was never love. It's attachment, it's conditioning, it's control. The rupture of authenticity exposes what has always been hidden, who really remains when you stop self-denial. The most interesting thing is that this rupture doesn't happen in a grand way. Often it begins with small gestures, saying "I can't" when you used to say "of course," choosing to rest instead of saving someone from their own chaos, allowing yourself to turn off your phone without guilt. These actions seem banal, but they are silent revolutions, signs that the self is emerging and the shadow is beginning to be heard. Authenticity isn't becoming insensitive, it's integrating what was previously denied. Your anger, your hunger, your right to exist. And each authentic gesture opens space for the soul to breathe outside its prison. At first, guilt tries to pull you back, but soon you realize you didn't die by choosing yourself. On the contrary, you were born. And it is in this birth that a new task arises, perhaps the most difficult of all, learning to unite what has always been separate, integrating the opposites that the world taught you to reject. This is the transcendent function. Carl Jung called this rare ability of the psyche to unite what seemed irreconcilable, the transcendent function. The empath, living divided between the docile persona and the angry shadow, must learn to withstand the clash of these opposites without running away. This isn't cheap poetry, it's psychic survival work. It means facing the fact that within you lies tenderness and fury, compassion and ego, kindness and desire. And only when you accept the coexistence of these opposites does the soul find wholeness. The problem is that we've been educated to choose sides. Either you're sweet or you're firm, either you're kind or you're selfish. This Manichaean mentality keeps you fragmented, eternally trapped in one pole. The transcendent function is the brutal invitation. Unite the fire of anger with the delicacy of care. Unite empathy with limits. Unite love with protection. Only then do you cease to be a reflection and begin to be an axis. Think about how this manifests in practice. How many times have you helped someone without having the energy and ended up empty? That's empathy without limits. Now imagine the opposite, setting limits without ceasing to care. It's saying, "I understand you, but I can't carry this for you." This gesture, simple and surgical, is the transcendent function happening in everyday life. It's when you learn that you can extend a hand without giving up your entire body. You can love without dying inside. You can listen without dissolving in the other's pain. This balance isn't natural. It needs to be practiced. Experiment in small situations. When you feel yourself giving in too much, stop and ask, if I say yes, am I choosing or am I betraying myself? This question opens the crack through which the shadow enters and the light ceases to be anesthesia. The self begins to emerge when you stop reacting like an automaton and begin to decide how to be whole. The transcendent function is painful because it forces you out of your persona's comfort zone. You can no longer live like a martyr, nor can you take refuge in the cynicism of those who feel nothing. You need to walk the line between empathy and firmness, and this requires radical presence. It's not about turning to stone, but about learning to be a tree, deep roots, branches that bend but don't break. This image is vital for the empath. It's not necessary to stop feeling, but it is urgent to learn to sustain yourself. The transcendent function is precisely this process of sustaining opposites until they become a new axis. And this axis is called emotional sovereignty. Because when you integrate your shadow with your light, you no longer live like a lost antenna. You live as a center of gravity. And this center no longer depends on the moods of others, but on the strength of those who have learned to be whole. Emotional sovereignty isn't isolation, it's command. It's when you stop being a puppet of your surroundings and become king of your own psychic territory. Carl Jung said that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. The empath, accustomed to gauging others' moods as if it were a radar, needs to turn their gaze inward and ask themselves, what do I feel right now? What do I need right now? It seems simple, but it's revolutionary. Because as long as you're trapped in the prison of utility, your worth will continue to be determined by how much you serve others. Emotional sovereignty breaks this logic. You're not worth what you offer, but by existing as a self. This is disturbing because it means disappointing those who have grown accustomed to your docility. But at the same time, it opens up new territory. You no longer need to beg for respect. You become respect. In practice, emotional sovereignty is learning to recalibrate your relationships. Observe with brutal honesty. How many of your connections are sustained simply because you give in? How many friendships would survive if you started saying no? This is the test of sovereignty. It separates the wheat from the chaff. Fragile bonds based on your lack of boundaries break, and this hurts because you'll hear accusations. You've changed. You've become cold. You're not the same anymore. But realize these voices don't denounce your transformation. They denounce the dependence others had on your submission. True bonds, however, deepen because sovereignty attracts those who don't fear their wholeness. Those who stay when you stop being a reflection deserve to stay. Those who leave when you choose yourself were never truly there. It's hard, but it's the natural screening of authenticity. Emotional sovereignty requires discipline, like silent training. You'll feel the urge to please again, to give in so as not to lose someone, to keep quiet to maintain the peace. But each time you choose yourself, you strengthen this invisible muscle of the soul. Try this. When someone asks you something that drains you, take a deep breath and answer clearly, "I can't today." This seemingly small gesture is a psychic earthquake, because you're not just denying a favor, you're affirming your existence. And each such act brings you closer to the self. Sovereignty doesn't eliminate empathy, but establishes boundaries as a guardian. It's not about hardening, but about protecting yourself. And when you begin to protect yourself, a new sensation emerges. It's no longer the world that decides who you are. It's you who decides. It's at this point that individuation ceases to be theory and becomes living flesh. Individuation isn't a distant philosophical concept. It's raw flesh. It's feeling your skin burn as the perfect mask begins to crack. Carl Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are, but he never promised it would be a beautiful process. For the empath, individuation arrives like an earthquake. The persona, so carefully constructed to maintain the love of others, begins to crumble. You realize you've spent years playing the role of the understanding, the trustworthy, the ever-present, and suddenly that role no longer fits. An unbearable discomfort arises, a void that can no longer be filled with applause or praise. It's in this abyss that the self begins to announce itself, not gently, but brutally. This is what raw individuation is, the painful tear between who you were trained to be and who your soul demands you become. This process has the bitter taste of rupture. You may lose friends, family members may estrange you, relationships may crumble. Not because you've become a worse person, but because you've finally stopped being the comfortable version of yourself for others. And herein lies the pain. The people who benefited most from your docility will be the first to accuse you of selfishness. But this accusation is the seal of authenticity, because only those who never truly loved you feel betrayed when you decide to love yourself. Raw individuation is bloody because it requires you to endure the emptiness of being without a role. For a time, you're no longer the savior, but you also don't know who you are. This intermediate phase is the desert of the soul, arid, lonely, endless. But it is in this desert that you find the spark of truth, the first spark of the self burning amidst the ashes of the persona. In practice, individuation means enduring contradiction without seeking shortcuts. It means accepting that you can be compassionate and at the same time feel anger. It means admitting that you can love deeply and still choose to walk away. It means enduring the pain of saying no and, at the same time, feeling the pleasure of finally choosing yourself. Individuation is a psychological birth. There is blood, there is screaming, there is loss. But what is born is real. The self emerges not as an idea, but as an embodied presence, an internal axis that no longer depends on external gaze. And each time you sustain this truth, even trembling, the process deepens. Don't expect flowers, expect ruptures, but know this. On the other side of this journey, you're no longer a reflection. You are a whole body. And this body, marked by scars, is the beginning of the return, not to the role others expect, but to what has always been within you. This return is inevitable. Returning to what has always been is not about returning to a lost childhood, but rediscovering the essence buried beneath layers of persona. Carl Jung said that the self is not a future achievement, but an ancient, forgotten reality, hidden by the mask we create to survive. The empath discovers that their sensitivity was not a gift, but a defense. It was not enlightenment, but a prison. And when they go through individuation raw, they realize they no longer need to live as a reflection of the other. This return is brutal because it requires abandoning identities that earned them applause, but never freedom. It's like shedding a garment that has become skin, painful, bloody, but necessary. You don't return to be more nice, you return to be whole. And whole means embracing the shadow, the ego, the anger, the desire. Because only then does kindness cease to be compulsive and become a conscious choice. This return manifests itself in small gestures of sovereignty. You help, but only when you have the energy. You love, but not at the expense of your own life. You listen, but not as a crutch, but as a presence. The empath begins to understand that they don't need to die to prove they love, that they can indeed be firm and still be compassionate, that they can distance themselves and still maintain love. This balance isn't perfection, it's authenticity. It's life ceasing to be conditioned by the fear of abandonment and beginning to be driven by the call of the self. This return deconstructs the illusion that being good means disappearing. Now, being good is including yourself. It's saying, I too deserve to be whole. I too deserve to be cared for. I too am worthy of existence. This recognition is revolutionary because, for the first time, your empathy doesn't empty you, it overflows. In the end, The return to who you always were is where the journey turns in on itself. You don't become someone new. You remember who you were before you had to pretend. It's like finding the face behind the broken mirror, seeing the child who could never be selfish, now claiming their right to exist. And life changes because your presence changes. You no longer ask for permission to exist. You exist. You no longer beg for love. You offer it from within, without begging for crumbs. This is the miracle of conscious empathy. It doesn't imprison you, it frees you, because now you choose when to feel, when to give, when to welcome, and above all, you choose yourself first. This return doesn't close the cycle, it begins it. Because deep down, the journey was never about learning to feel for others, but about daring to feel for yourself. And that's where the call of the self is fulfilled. And now I ask you, how long will you call love what was always fear? How long will you smile while your shadow screams? How long will you accept being everyone's shoulder and never anyone's embrace? You pride yourself on being an empath, but deep down you know. Your kindness is prison, your silence is anger, your sweetness is exhaustion. And if you don't face this now, you'll continue betraying yourself in the name of a love that never existed. So decide, will you keep pretending or will you finally choose to be whole? If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.